So now I want to move to Iran and what's actually happened in Iran and what we as people on the left should say about it. And obviously, we've seen since the middle of June last month, um, nothing less than a mass popular uprising for people demanding their democratic rights. Because if people know what's happened, the president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, stole the election on June 12th. And that stolen election was ratified by the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who ratified the rigged ballot vote count. And in response, millions of students, 3 million students and workers in the city of Tehran alone, and a few to 3 days after the vote was announced, poured into the streets of Tehran. But not only in Tehran, all the major cities in the country had mass protests of people demanding their basic democratic rights. And they confronted some of the most brutal repression we've seen recently, conducted by the government in Iran. Brutal repression. Dozens of people have been shot down in the street, really exercising their democratic right to protest. Hundreds have been jailed. Hundreds have been tortured into false confessions that they're CIA stooges, agents of the United States or Israel. Don't believe confessions when they come out of Guantanamo. Don't believe them when they come out of the torture chambers of Tehran. Mm-hmm. So this has not died, though. This resistance has not been quelled, faced with that horrible police repression. And what we are seeing really is an opening of a whole new epoch in the country of Iran. What began as a simple factional fight between two different wings of the Iranian ruling class over how to privatize the country's wealth opened up space for people, students, women, oppressed nationalities within the country of Iran, as well as workers across the board, to say, what about us? Where's our piece of the pie? And so what began as a simple struggle over democracy has the potential for unleashing a serious workers' movement and workers' rebellion in the country of Iran that has a potential for really changing the whole map of the entire Middle East. So this is very historic stuff that we're going through right now. Now, the tragedy of this situation is a lot of people on the left are utterly confused by what's an obvious situation of which side are you on. Are you on the side of the government, their guns shooting protesters, or are you on the side of the protesters exercising their democratic right to protest and demand basic fair elections? Many on the left don't know what to say about this, are utterly confused, and have actually taken the completely wrong side, many of them lining up with Ahmadinejad's regime. So if you look at many organizations like the Party for Socialism and Liberation, the party behind Answer, they have actually attacked the protesters as middle-class agents of the CIA, and they have backed the Ahmadinejad regime as a anti-imperialist regime. So they dismiss this movement as middle class. Many other, if you read MR Zine, I don't know if people ever read that, very important web magazine that has a lot of good stuff on it usually. I think they've really lost their compass on Iran. And so they've run speeches by Ayatollah Khamenei basically denouncing the protesters. They've taken the side of the regime against the mass democratic movement. And this is the basic arguments. They dismiss the movement as middle class. And that's completely a mischaracterization. Of almost everybody I've talked to who's actually in Tehran describes this as, of course, many students. What's the matter with students protesting? If we condemn students protesting, many of us activist careers we should feel guilty about being student activists. So middle-class students, of course, have been in the streets, but also workers in tremendous numbers have been in the streets as well, especially workers from the auto factories as well as from the bus drivers' unions. Why? Because under Ahmadinejad's regime, workers have faced 30% inflation, 20% unemployment for young workers, 40% unemployment for young women. So it's far from a middle-class movement. This is a genuine movement of students and workers protesting in the streets and cities of Iran. They also argue, the confused left also argues that the CIA is behind the whole thing. And this is like a whole conspiracy theory thing that's erupted on the left in the United States. If you've been around the anti-war movement, the 9/11 truthers are all over it, as if there's some vast conspiracy by the U.S. government to blow up its own Pentagon. A crazy idea, but that's actually gotten currency. I think there's a similar kind of conspiracy theory that anything in the Middle East that happens that's against a regime that the U.S. opposes has got to be a CIA plot. That and this idea is so incredibly condescending to the people of Iran, the people who suffered under a dictatorship sponsored by the U.S. government for decades. The Shah of Iran are not suddenly going to say, "Oh, I'll take the money from the CIA, go protest in the streets so we can get the Shah back." That's not exactly what millions of people are demonstrating for in the cities and whole country of Iran. They also claim that Ahmadinejad is some kind of populist leader, that he's on the side of the poor. And actually, this has been thoroughly debunked. If you look at many of the studies done of the so-called rural poor that support Ahmadinejad, in fact, many of the rural poor oppose Ahmadinejad for all sorts of reasons. Many of them are ethnically oppressed, ethnic nationalities that are oppressed by the Ahmadinejad regime. He's also cut off all sorts of subsidies that used to supply the rural poor with some means of getting by. So his roots and claim to be a populist representative of the rural poor are really far-fetched. And it's also the case he's a thoroughly capitalist party politician who advocates neoliberal privatization of the state-owned industries and is still applying for membership of the World Trade Organization. This is not exactly a populist hero. This is no Hugo Chavez. This is not Venezuela in the Middle East. Worst of all, people on the left, many of them, MR Zine, and PSL and others, claim that Ahmadinejad's regime is anti-imperialist and that we have to support Ahmadinejad's regime as a bulwark against U.S. imperialism. Really, this is the anti-imperialism of fools. It's completely wrong. Ahmadinejad's regime actually has been playing footsie with the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan, supporting these occupations. Who are the biggest supporters of the Maliki client government that the U.S. maintains in Iraq? Iran and the United States. They both go and have meetings, and you can be sure that they're backdoor meetings between U.S. government representatives and Iranian government representatives. They're at the bargaining table in the occupation of Afghanistan. They've been invited in for meetings with the U.S. government and Afghan representatives for how to run the occupation of Afghanistan. And really, Ahmadinejad's lunatic Holocaust denial speeches are a fantasy for U.S. imperialism and Israeli Zionism. They can point to an Iranian bogeyman and say, look at what this guy stands for, we should bomb that country. So in many ways, that's not anti-imperialism. That makes really the movement in the Middle East more difficult because the U.S. has a convenient boogeyman. And finally, Iran as a country is not anti-imperialist, but it's a sub-imperialist country. It's actually trying to flex its muscle in the rest of the Middle East and into Central Asia. It's a minor bit player. Obviously, the biggest enemy of the planet is the United States. But they would like to move up the mafioso chain, and Ahmadinejad is a junior mafioso challenging the U.S. and sometimes collaborating. And essentially what this whole methodology is the methodology that has been, I think, an albatross for the American left. That is, the politics of my enemy's enemy is my friend, which I never understood. If you've been ever in a street yard fight, you don't think my enemy's enemy is my friend because one enemy beats you, you escape that one, and the next enemy beats you. So it's not exactly, a survival tactic. As a skinny white guy, I've been beat up many times in those schoolyard fights, and I never understood that. And for the American left, it's been disastrous because it's discredited us in the United States. Because who do we stand for? Dictatorships around the world. That's what the left has been misconstrued in the United States. And so this my enemy's enemy is my friend politics really is terrible. So much of the left lined up with the crushing of the Hungarian revolt in 1956 against the dictatorship there, or the suppression of the Czech uprising in 1968, or Solidarity in 1980, or Tiananmen Square in 1989. Many of these same organizations opposed the Tiananmen Square rebellion as middle-class students who are objective agents of American imperialism in China. We have to dispense with that. We need to build a whole new left that says, we're very clearly against U.S. imperialism, and at the same time, we're on the side of a mass democratic movement of students and workers fighting for change underneath a terribly reactionary regime in the country of Iran. That's the real internationalism on which a new left has to be built in the United States.